Welcome to Ignite Intimacy, a podcast exploring intimacy, romantic relationships, sexuality, and everything that relates to these hot topics. We're going in. Are you ready? This is your host, Laura Aisha. Let's do this. Hello, Ignite Intimacy community. It is Miss Laura Aisha, your host with the most, checking in to remind you that we will be recording live from the South by Southwest podcast stage in Austin, Texas on Saturday, March 9th at 9:30 a.m. at the JW Marriott. So come and check us out. If you have a South by Southwest badge, then you can come and sit in on the podcast recording. And we'd love to see you there and have your energy in the audience for a hot and juicy conversation all about making disclosure sexy. So come and check us out in Austin, Texas, Saturday, March 9th at 9:30 a.m. You do need a South by Southwest badge in order to attend, and I cannot wait to be joined by my colleagues Courtney Brame from Something Positive for Positive People and sex educator Ashley Manta. So check it out, southbysouthwest.com. It's sxsw.com, and we will see you in Austin. Ciao for now. Big kiss. Mwah. What is happening, Ignite Intimacy community? It is your host, Miss Laura Aisha. It is December. We're 2 weeks to Christmas. Happy holidays. You will hear this in the new year. So big up, bless up. 2019, live and direct. Woo! So grateful to be here with you all. 2018 was amazing. Our second year of doing this podcast, and almost 100 episodes in. By now we're at 100 and we are rocking and rolling, heading for South by Southwest in March. Great things on the horizon. We're just so grateful for all your love and support. And I'm just stoked to have our guests on the line today. We've got Stephanie Zuber here from Ithaca. What's up, Stephanie?
Yeah, hey, how are you?
Yes, I know. I was like, we met at this Esther Perel event that was focused on the masculinity paradox. And it was here in New York City in November, and it was phenomenal. It was a powerful day focusing on men and relationships and toxic masculinity and like how men are conditioned to behave and how men want to actually behave and what's actually true for men, what's not true for men. And it was amazing, wasn't it?
It was wonderful. It was so good.
Yeah. So this is a really big topic, and it's something that I know I deeply care about. I'm assuming that you do as well, Stephanie. And it's not something that we'll get too much into on this episode, but that is where Stephanie and I had an opportunity to meet. And so Stephanie's in Ithaca, and, big up all my Ithaca people. I love Ithaca. I'm from Western New York. So I'm like, yes, Ithaca. And I have a ton of friends in Ithaca, and I go to the Grassroots Festival of Music and Dance every year. So
yes.
Yeah. So all of that is in the Ithaca general vicinity. And I was like, oh, sweet. You're a sex therapist in Ithaca? I probably have some clients for you. So we're going to get into a conversation today. It was just sort of synchronistic that we were speaking recently about mismatched desire, and sometimes also known as sexless relationships or sexless marriages. And we're just going to dive into like mismatched desires, like sexual desire in general, and why you feel desire for one person when you don't with another. And then at what point do you choose to stay in a relationship or make a move? And we're going to get into all that juicy goodness today. Right, Stephanie?
So good. Yes. So good.
So, okay. I just want to give the audience like a little, insight as to who you are in the world and, what you're up to. So just give us some insight into you.
Yeah, sounds good. So I am a licensed mental health counselor and I have a private practice in Ithaca, New York, like you said, and happen to be the only sex therapist in town. There was one other and she's
Wow.
retired. And so it's just me. It's a pretty lonely world, but but it's really wonderful too, the types of conversations I get to have and the type of help that I get to do. And not many places can we talk about sex. So this is really good.
Mm-hmm.
So I am taking coursework through the Institute for Sexuality Education and Enlightenment to eventually be certified as a sex therapist at this point. That's what I'm doing. So yeah, I
Great.
see a lot of couples, a lot of individuals, and the number one reason that couples tend to come to see me is because of having sexless relationships or these mismatched desires. And that is the same for hetero couples, gay and lesbian couples. And also, it's not just the female that's having the low libido, it's 50% of the men that are having it too.
Interesting.
Yes.
So I'm really interested in this topic because I recently discovered that this man that I was seeing, or that I've been seeing, who I love spending time with him. He's super cool. He's super amazing. There's just so many great things about him. The last time we were together, I just wasn't feeling sexual desire towards him. And it brought up a lot of stuff for me. Like, I felt bad. I was like, what's wrong? What's going on here? Like, this really sucks because he's such a great guy. And I really enjoyed being with him. And I love that sexual desire, that spark, that when you're with someone that you really enjoy being with. So,
oh, yeah, that feeling of eroticism, that aliveness. Yeah.
Yeah. And so Stephanie and I spoke recently, and I said, what are some really hot topics for you right now? Like, what do you find that you're working with your clients on a lot? And she said, oh, mismatched desires and sexless relationships. And I was like, oh, let's talk about that. So I'm curious, like, as far as your own journey, because I know that there was an experience that you had personally that got you just maybe not focused on this topic, but it gave you insight into this whole topic of sexless marriages and relationships.
Oh, for sure. Yes, for sure. And it's certainly what led me to be a sex therapist. So I think it is a big part of the story and who I am. So I was in a sexless marriage and it was really painful. I happened to be in a heterosexual relationship and I, as the female, wanted more sex than my male partner did. I think with that, I should add that I grew up in a very traditional fundamentalist Baptist background. And so I decided with my partner at the time, who I later married, that we would wait until we were married to have sex. And that ended up being about a 5-year wait.
Wow. Have you seen Jane the Virgin?
No, I haven't, but I have heard of this and I have been told to watch it, so I will.
It's great.
Yeah, I'm sure I could find some similarities in that. So yeah, I waited until I was married to have sex. I don't know if that played the complete factor into the sexless relationship, but I can't help but think that it was certainly a variable, because how are you supposed to know after all of that time goes by and to create that spark? Needless to say, it was a really painful time for me. I wanted sex, but I think it wasn't just the sex that I wanted. I wanted to be desired. I wanted to be wanted.
Yes.
And not having that was a really lonely experience. And so I started to question, what's wrong with me? Yeah. Am I not pretty enough? Am I not sexy enough? Do I need to lose weight? Do I need to gain more muscle? What is it about me that I'm not enough for you to want? And so I think through that process, I still don't know exactly the reasons for it. I don't necessarily need to at this point in my life. But what I did come to terms with later on was that, maybe this really had nothing to do with me. Maybe this had nothing to do with attraction, but it had a lot to do with the fact that you can love and care for someone a whole lot and have a whole lot of intimacy with them. And because of that, your desire drops for them. And so why is that? And so through that, it's kind of led me on this journey of, how do you help couples have really courageous conversations about their sex, their wants, their needs in sex, essentially like their erotic biography, right? So that's kind of a little bit what led me into where I'm at now and the work that I do.
Mm-hmm. Well, okay, so a couple of things that I want to just touch on because this is so important. So first of all, I know, Esther Perel has a lot of
Yes.
conversation
Yes.
around how the things that we don't want to talk about with our partners, the fears, the loss of desire, the affairs, the infidelities, whatever it is, even just like would you, be more gentle, or would you like kiss my breasts, or would you like do this or do that? By courageously opening up, it can expand what's possible there, and it can expand your level of connection, intimacy, desire, so being courageous and starting to have those conversations.
Oh, yeah. It takes a lot of courage because it's a risk. And the more time you've had with someone and the more time that's gone by where you've not had sex with someone and there's conflict around that, or sometimes just silence, it's really hard to take that leap to talk about it and to say it. And so oftentimes what I see when people come in is that we're rarely, if we talk about the sex that you're not having, it's not going to lead to more sex. So I like to start the conversation about, let's talk about your sexuality. What does sex mean to you? What's your sexual or erotic autobiography? What are the experiences you've had, great, pleasurable, or not? I don't feel as though many couples tend to have those conversations. And so that can be really helpful in opening up and making and creating a safe space for all that risk that it takes to be courageous in that. Yeah.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, and then also this experience of being desired. I've had the great pleasure of having men in my life that it was like, oh my goodness gracious, their desire for me was palpable, or like is palpable, and like, and in a way that like deeply turns me on. Mm-hmm. Because sometimes a man can desire me and I'm like, whoa.
Yeah.
Hold your horses. Hang on. Hang on, buddy. And that goes to the chemistry too. So we'll get into some chemistry conversation as well.
Sure.
Like the sexual chemistry between people. But like, yeah, like there's, okay, yeah, fine. Two people can like get each other off. And then there's actually like being desired and desiring someone, and like, just that whole like warming someone up, and like the foreplay conversation, and like, and for me, if I don't desire you, the foreplay is not going to exist because there's no desire there, right?
Yeah, I think that's a good thing to point out, because sometimes through assessment, you find that you have a different type of sexual response than your partner. So you may be slower to respond than not. And maybe that's because of attraction or not, but it can often be misinterpreted, I think. So I often like to talk about that in terms of, you might need a little bit more than he or she needs to get this started. And let's talk about that. And let's talk about it outside the bedroom first. I think sometimes talking about it in the bedroom can create a little bit more pressure.
Oh, yeah. Well, and also just some awkwardness, and like, talk about it when you're like having coffee in the morning or sitting around chilling out in the evening, and not when you're naked. If you can, the conversation occurs in the bedroom when you're naked, go for it. Like that's when the conversation's occurring, and it can be less awkward and less intimidating, I think, for me personally, to have those conversations when we're not in a sexual space.
Yes, right. It's less vulnerable and less raw in some ways for some people. Yeah, exactly. Right. So the cool thing about my job is that people come to me wanting to have these conversations, and yet so that's kind of the setup, right? That I can safely facilitate them into having these conversations. But I think part of my assessment too, and this comes from my sex therapy background, is to really assess for whether or not this is a sudden discrepancy issue. Is this something that just started happening, or is it something that's been happening for a long time? And that's important for me because I do think it's important to rule out physical causes, that may be at play in this, and that could be anything from hormonal imbalances to depression. It could be medications that you're on. Even birth control pills can over time often will diminish libido, antidepressants, and doctors don't always necessarily disclose these potential side effects to people. So we talk about that. Also, pain during sex. And this is maybe not so much for men, but I think a lot of women are experiencing pain during sex. They're not saying anything about it because they're often told, well, that's just what happens. do it more, you'll get over it. And that's not always the case. And so if that is a part of this, I will quickly refer them to a physical therapist who specializes in pelvic floor health. I think it's really important. So yeah, that's part of this too. But I think the stuff that Esther Perel has really put out there for us in the last decade is a lot of the rich meat that we can get into about, what's really going on here.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So, okay. So let's put ourselves in this scenario. Like, so just so that we're, speaking in just like simplified terms, sure. What is mismatched desire?
So that's a really great question, and often a question that I have difficulty answering, because I think what you see out there often is if you're having sex less than 10 times in 1 year, then you are in a mismatched desired relationship. Or if you're having sex or you haven't had sex in 6 months, then you're in a sexless relationship. So the problem that I have with that is that it doesn't necessarily account for defining what sex is. Like, I don't know how they're defining sex.
Yeah, like is sex only intercourse? Is sex any type of sexual behavior?
Right. Exactly.
I actually, this has come up quite a few times for me in the last year, where one of my lovers is like, we're having sex. And I'm like, but we haven't had sex yet. And they're like, yeah, but what are you defining as sex? Like, if you're pleasuring me and I'm pleasuring you, like that to me is sex. And I'm like, wow, I've always defined sex as sexual intercourse. And then just like meditating on like, maybe it is any act of sexual behavior.
Sure, right. Any behavior that brings you that type of arousal that you have in a committed, non-exploitive, kind of consensual way. Yeah. So that's why I don't know what they're accounting for when I see these numbers or these studies done around that. But for me, basically, if you're in a relationship with someone and you're having less sex than you want to, and that's a problem for you, and your partner doesn't want as much sex as you do, then that to me is a sexless relationship or a mismatch in desire. Because the thing is that you could have sex 2 times a year. It could be really wonderful and mind-blowing and soulful. And you're totally fine with that. And so is your partner. That's great. I think that sometimes people think, and this has been a momentum, I think, recently, that you should be having an intense amount of sex and it should be really amazing. And if you're not, there's something wrong with you. And that's not the case. If you don't want to be having sex and your partner is okay with the amount you're having too, there's nothing wrong with that. It only becomes a problem when one person in the relationship wants more than the other.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Okay. So what happened in your own relationship that, like, what was sort of the pivotal moment where it was like, hang on, something is amiss here. We've got to do something here.
Yeah, I think it was that point of, okay, I've noticed that I want this more than the other. I've now taken a risk and asked for my needs to be met, and they're not being met. Then I've taken the next step of, clearly for my situation, which I would not recommend to all, is I ended up cheating on my spouse at the time, and I ended up cheating on them with a woman. And it was through my interaction with this woman and my sexual exploration with them that I realized there's a huge world out there that I had not been exposed to. And now that I know it, I cannot go back. And, it just came to a point where it wasn't something that could be worked on in my relationship. That wasn't an easy point to come to, nor was it a very quick decision to be made. And I think that's what I see a lot with couples is, how do I know when I'm supposed to stay in this and be in this? And how do I know when it's time to go?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's a big question. Right? So
how do I,
So it starts with a conversation. Hopefully you're having a conversation with your partner and saying like, okay, what is going on here? Because like, I want you, you don't seem to want me, or vice versa. Or like, it just seems like this is just to get it like over with. Like I hear this conversation a lot from people in long-term relationships where it's like, oh, I just sort of let him, like, remember that video that we watched?
Yes.
At Esther's event, and there was this couple and the woman was admitting that yes, she sometimes fakes orgasms because she just kind of like wants to like get it over with. And I've certainly had the experience where I'm like, okay, what is sort of like the quickest way that I could get this person off? So that I'm like, I'm like managing it in my head. And then I have the experience with other people where it's like, I wish we could stay in bed all day, and like, and it's not even about climaxing. It's not even about that at all. It's just about like, oh my God, I'm just like,
Yeah, that journey, that connection, the want is just there without, Yeah, I think that it does start by conversation. I think for some, it's difficult to have the conversation face to face. And so I will suggest to people, write a letter, send an email, something where it says, this is something that I've discovered is very important to me, and it's not occurring in our relationship. What is it that you could do about this to help me with this? What is it that we can do together to see if we can work on this or manage this? I think that's step one. And at that point, sometimes that's when couples come to counseling or seek out a sex therapist, right? But then what happens when that occurs? The partner with a low libido decides to work on this, and still no change is made. And so the person wanting more is at this kind of boiling point of, when do I stay committed because I made a commitment? And when do I stay committed to myself and my own values and leave? And so sometimes I think that's where the question of monogamy comes in. And not everybody's up for it, but I think it's certainly something to at least touch upon, that, hey, I'm telling you that this is an expectation of mine, that it's something that's really important to me. If you cannot meet that, then would it be possible for us to have a relationship, a very caring and loving relationship where I stay with you and I have sexual intimacy with other people? Or do I leave you and don't talk to you and have sex with other people, or something in between? Like, how do we design our relationship in a way where it's meeting all of our needs a little bit more?
Yes. Okay. So that's a good place to start.
Yeah. And I think, unfortunately, if that still is not the case, then really it's about questioning if you leave or not. And in terms of gender, I think particularly for women, if it's the woman who is really wanting to be desired more or have more sex, and it's the male who often doesn't express to others his low libido because it's embarrassing, and men have been cultured to want sex and want it all the time, right? That it really hasn't been acceptable for a while for a woman to want sex, let alone to want to leave the relationship because of wanting more sex. And so oftentimes I try to address that. But having a lifetime of de-eroticization or desexualization is a really high price to pay if that's something that's really important to you. So it's something to really explore, what you can manage, what you can give up, what you can negotiate, what you cannot. I know that doesn't give the answer to everybody, but it's some things to think about.
Well, it's a very personal choice, right?
Oh,
like
for
there's
sure. Yes.
no easy way. Well, there could be. I mean, it could be easy for someone to say, you know what, I'm done with this, or what, I'm committed to working through this, and because we know energy in long-term relationships ebbs and flows.
It does.
So that's real. That's part of being in a long-term relationship with someone. And sometimes it's just about seeing it through. Some of those, those lulls in desire and in connection. And okay, so
exactly.
Very personal choice. And
yes,
I say definitely talk about it before you make the choice.
Yeah, I mean, right. That's the thing. I think it's like, if I had learned anything from my personal experiences, it was, I really could have talked a little bit more about this and put out there my expectations before I left.
Mm-hmm.
And I didn't do that. I didn't give someone a choice really so much to say, can I do this? I didn't realize it was at this point that you're looking elsewhere sexually. Mm-hmm. And I wish that, I had been able to say that. Maybe something else could have been done, maybe not. But that's what I do really encourage people to do, is to speak it. Because then you give your partner a choice as to, okay, they're pretty serious. There could be some serious consequences to this. Let me think about this.
Absolutely. Well, and so then what are some of the bad sexual habits that can get a couple into or lead to diminished sexual desire?
Yeah, sure. So one thing that I talk about is when you have mindless sex. And by that, I mean, you're checking out, you're disassociating, you're really not in the present moment. If you're going to be not fully embodied in sex like that, it's really going to work to diminish your desire.
And what does that mean? What does that mean? Like fantasizing about other people or?
No. No, I mean like completely not being fully present. Because that's a good question, right? A lot of people do ask that, like, is it okay to fantasize about others or have other experiences in your mind while you're having sex? That is not something that I think I'm talking to, that it's much more of a lifeless kind of numbing out where you're not thinking about anything else. It's not like you're thinking about trying to go get the dishes done, but you can't bring yourself. It's not that kind of thing. It's much more of a, yeah, dissociative would be the word. Like I'm not even in this room right now. I'm not even in this body. I'm not even thinking about the way touch is received or given or even anything sexual. Because what it would do is create these neural pathways in our brain that allow us to not experience desire in any sort of way. Mm-hmm. So I think also if you are keeping silent about physical pain, that certainly is going to lead to diminished desire. I think also emotional pain. Sometimes there's deep wounds or betrayals or issues within your relationship that are impacting your desire. And so that's going to eventually lead to not having desire for the person. Another one that I unfortunately hear about a bit is it's really important not to make critical remarks about your partner's performance or their appearance or their body or anything that is deeply personal about their sexuality. That is going to be an erotic disaster for a very long time. Not a good habit to get into.
Yeah.
Those are some of the more like bad sexual habits you can get into. But I think what often happens too, like I love what you said about how, energy ebbs and flows, connection ebbs and flows. Our, desire for our partner, if we're with them over the long term, ebbs and flows, right? And so I often have couples really look back to what it was like in the very beginning. And how did you meet? What is it that drew you to one another? And do you remember those really special things that you did in the beginning for one another? The special ways you felt, the special things you did for the other. And would the same things make you feel special today? Do you have the same desires or have your interests changed? And then can we talk about maybe one or two things that you could really commit some intention to work on in the coming months to bring back into the relationship? Because I think what often happens, and Esther Perel talks about this amazingly, is that we bring home our leftovers to our partners. We go to work, we dress our best, we have meetings with clients and patients. We don't look at our phone while we're talking to them. We don't check our emails while we're in conversation with them. And then we go home, we immediately dress out of our clothes, we get into comfy clothes, which is okay sometimes, but we don't always look our best, and we sit next to our partner watching Netflix with our laptop open with our phones next to us. And so I think it really takes intention to be set to make sex a priority in your life. And if you do that, it does avoid or at least greatly minimize this problem from happening.
Yes. Well, and just in wrapping up here, what are some ways to keep passion and desire alive in long-term committed relationships?
Yeah, well, I think that's just some of it, right? Is setting those intentions in ways that you can build in that mystery. And build back in that wanting and build back in that knowing. And I often will have couples talk about, when is it that you're most attracted to this person? Or when is it that you were most attracted to that person? And how can you look at them again with a new set of eyes, right? Not just as this person that you've just lived all these years with and had all these kids with and share all these bills with and have all these responsibilities with, but how do you incorporate back in your erotic self with them as well? That's so important. And, there's a whole lot of other things that go into this, and things to explore in terms of your background and how you were brought up and how you relate and learn to love. But that's kind of just the beginning of it.
Yeah. Well, and I just also think like role play.
Yes.
Role play. And it's something that I am not totally comfortable with a lot of the times because I get self-conscious and I feel insecure and I'm like, and it's like, right. What if you just freaking like bump into each other on the street and pretend like you're just meeting for the first time and like ask each other out on a date or, let your partner know where you're going to be and be sitting somewhere and have your partner approach you as if you've never met, and like spend an evening getting to know each other again.
Oh, for sure. And I think what you're talking about is this playfulness, right? This imaginative nature that we often don't go to once we're already in it, and we know the person's going to be there the next day. You've already got them. You don't really need to do anything to keep them. I think that's a great thing to explore. I think also dance or any place where you're able to really get into these ways where you're playful, you're out of the routine, you're not doing the same thing. I think it's this myth that sex is supposed to be spontaneous over the long term. It just isn't. When you're in a committed relationship over the long term,
add careers.
Yes.
Yeah.
Add kids, add careers, it becomes premeditated sex. And so you do have to find these ways to keep it fun and playful and imaginatory.
Yeah. Well, and then also there is something really sexy and desire that can grow when you choose, you know what, we're not going to be sexual for a period of time.
Mm-hmm.
And I need my space and you are going to have your space and and then allowing the desire to grow again.
Yes. Oh, I love that you say that. How do I build in that separateness so that we can have connectedness later? And I think this is, another thing that's been talked about too a lot by Esther. Shout out to Esther, right? Is that she talks a lot about how if we don't know how to experience our own pleasure and our own excitement, then we don't know how to be inside ourselves while also inside the other at the same time. And that is essential in making love to someone that we love.
That's right. That's right. Yep. Yeah. And I believe that the pathway to deeper connections, world peace, everything is self-love. And, you know, I'm on the journey to self-love. 10 years ago, I had no idea what that even looked like or what it felt like or anything. I was like, my twin sister's like, you need to learn how to love yourself. And I was like, okay, I don't even, you're talking gibberish to me right now. And so I've been on the journey and I'm starting to really get what that is to love myself. And so the more that we can love ourselves, we love each other, we can be more authentic and genuine in our relationships and our lives and our families and our communities. And it's just one little thing, just try one little thing and then try another little thing. And, and because look, you add kids to the mix, it's a whole nother dynamic. You add any health issues to the mix, a whole other dynamic. Careers that take people far from home for long periods of time or just frequently or keep them in the office late at night and weekends and holidays. I mean, these are realities that, poverty, whatever, abuse, mental and emotional challenges. I mean, it's,
trauma.
Here we are, human beings hurling through outer space, working it out. And well, Stephanie, this has been a wonderful conversation. And I want to make sure that people know how to find you online.
Sure. Yeah. So you can visit me at my website, stephaniezuber.com. All my contact info is there. And my Instagram is Sex Therapy with Stephanie. You can connect with me there as well. And it was so wonderful talking to you about this. I appreciate you inviting me. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. Well, and it is wonderful. So our audience knows Stephanie Zuber, Zuber.com, and on Instagram at Sex Therapy with Stephanie. This has been a great conversation. We're not going to get to the big aha answer, right? It's different for everyone.
Right. Yeah. Well, I don't know if there's a answer so much as it's a problem to be managed, Exactly.
Yeah. It's something that, is there, it's present, it's happening across many relationships, across cultures, across the world. So just having the conversation, and I trust that, this conversation will just inspire our listeners, inspire you, inspire, each of us to be courageous, have conversations, be in communication, and also know when it's time to say yes and know when it's time to say no and when it's time to just, move forward into a new thing. So Stephanie, thank you so much. Ignite Intimacy Community. We love you all. Big up yourselves. 2019. Here we come. Here we are. And just keep loving yourselves, love each other. And I'll do the same. Stephanie, I think you're doing the same over there in Ithaca, New York as well.
Yes.
And we love y'all. So just stay blessed. And we will see you on the next one. Ciao for now. Thanks for tuning in to another conversation on the Ignite Intimacy podcast hotline. We love that you choose to spend your time with us. Check us out at igniteintimacy.com. Subscribe to us on iTunes and leave us a review and a rating. It helps more people know about us. We love to hear from you. You can email us with questions, comments, or suggestions to hello@igniteintimacy.com. And tell your friends. Music was arranged by Jason Pfaff and Mike Corey, and this podcast is produced by yours truly, Laura Aisha. Thanks again, and we'll see you on the next one. In the meantime, let your light shine bright and ignite your intimacy.